I was 42 years old when my brother told me I was finished. Not at a family dinner, not in some angry phone call, not in the middle of a fight. He said it in court. The courtroom smelled like old wood copier toner and the stale coffee someone had spilled near the clerk's desk hours earlier. My brother Derek Foster sat across the aisle in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first army paycheck. He leaned back in his chair and smiled at me like a man who had already seen the ending of the movie. "You're finished," he whispered. I looked at him and didn't answer. My attorney Evelyn Parker stood up. "Your Honor, before the court concludes today's proceedings, we'd like to call one final witness." The room went still. The judge looked over his glasses. Derek's lawyer frowned. Then the courtroom doors opened. The sound echoed through the room. I watched my brother's face change. The color drained out of it. His smile vanished so fast it was almost frightening. "No," he whispered. Then even quieter. "Not him." At that moment I knew something had finally shifted. I just didn't know how much. 6 months earlier, none of us had been sitting in that courtroom. 6 months earlier, I still had a brother. Or at least I thought I did. My name is Natalie Foster. I'm a major in the United States Army. For 20 years I believed two things without question. The first was that duty mattered. The second was that family did too. The Army eventually proved the first one true. My brother proved the second one wrong. The call came on a cold Thursday morning while I was finishing paperwork at Fort Lewis. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my mother's name on my phone. She never called during work hours. Never. When I answered, all I heard was crying. Then 3 words. "Dad is gone." Everything after that became a blur. The drive. The flight. The rental car. The endless miles of Montana highway stretching beneath a gray sky. I arrived in Helena almost 20 hours after the call. The funeral was already over. That was the first thing Derek stole from me. Not money. Not property. The chance to say goodbye. I parked outside the family ranch and sat behind the steering wheel for nearly 5 minutes. The place looked exactly the same. The white fence. The weathered red barn. The cottonwood tree Dad planted when I was 10. Everything looked untouched. Except nothing was. The moment I stepped inside the house, I felt it. The atmosphere. The tension. The silence. My mother hugged me, but it felt distracted. Like she was thinking about something else. Derek appeared from the kitchen carrying a coffee mug. Finally made it. No hug. No condolences. No mention of Dad. Just that. Something cold settled in my stomach. We sat at the dining room table later that afternoon. The same table where Dad used to help me with algebra. The same table where Derek and I played cards during snowstorms. Only now it felt like a conference room. Folders covered the surface. Documents. Contracts. Statements. Derek tapped one stack. "Dad left me in charge of everything." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." Mom nodded immediately. "He handled most things for your father the last few years." That wasn't true. Dad still balanced his own books. Still paid his own bills. Still complained whenever online banking changed its layout. I knew because we talked every Sunday. Every single Sunday. "Where's the will?" I asked. Derek exchanged a glance with Mom. "We're still organizing paperwork." That answer bothered me. Not because it was impossible. Because it sounded rehearsed. Over the next few days, things kept getting stranger. Dad's office was locked. Derek had the key. The filing cabinets were empty. Dad's laptop was gone. Several shelves that once held folders and records had been cleared entirely. Whenever I asked questions, Derek gave vague answers. Whenever I pushed harder, he became defensive. On the 4th day, I found him carrying boxes from Dad's office to his truck. "What are those business records?" "Whose business records?" "Dad's." "Then why are they leaving the ranch?" His jaw tightened. "Because I'm handling the estate." I stared at him. He stared back. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. That evening, I walked out to the old barn. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Dad loved sunsets. Said they reminded him that endings weren't always bad. I sat on an overturned bucket and listened to the wind push through the grass. For the first time since his death, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like something inside me had finally cracked. When I returned to the house, I found Mom asleep in her recliner. The television flickered softly in the corner. I covered her with a blanket and headed toward the guest room. Halfway down the hallway, I stopped. Dad's old study door was slightly open. That hadn't happened once all week. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and dust. Most of the shelves were empty. The desk drawers had been cleaned out. But something caught my eye. A small envelope wedged behind a bookshelf. Hidden. Almost invisible. I pulled it free. Inside was a printed email. The date was 3 months before Dad died. The message had been sent to one of his old friends. Most of it was ordinary. Discussion about cattle prices. Weather. A fishing trip they never took. Then I reached the final paragraph. And my heart stopped. If anything happens to me, Natalie must see the original documents herself. Not copies, the originals. That was it. No explanation. No details. Just one sentence. One warning. I read it 3 times. Then 4. Outside the study window, I heard Derek's truck pull into the driveway. My pulse started hammering. Because suddenly every missing file, every locked cabinet, every vague answer, every defensive reaction, looked different. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. For the first time, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was investigating. And deep down, a terrible thought had begun taking shape. What if my father hadn't been trying to protect the family? What if he'd been trying to protect me from my own brother? I barely slept that night. The guest room mattress felt unfamiliar beneath me, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sentence again. Natalie must see the original documents, not copies. The originals. My father had chosen those words carefully. He wasn't the kind of man who wasted words. At 5:17 the next morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I pulled on a sweatshirt, grabbed a mug of coffee, and stepped out onto the back porch. The Montana air was cold enough to sting my lungs. The ranch sat quiet beneath the early morning sky. The cattle hadn't started moving yet. The world felt frozen. For a few minutes, I could almost pretend everything was normal. That Dad was still asleep upstairs, that I'd hear his boots on the kitchen floor any minute, that he'd complain about the weather and ask me when I planned on taking another vacation. Instead, there was only silence and questions. By the time Derek came downstairs, I had already made a decision. I wasn't leaving until I found out what happened to those documents. He walked into the kitchen carrying his phone and a cup of coffee. "You're up early." "So are you." He shrugged. "Estate work." There it was again. Estate work. His favorite phrase. The magical explanation for everything. I watched him sit down. "You still haven't shown me the will." His expression changed immediately. Not much. Just enough. A slight tightening around his eyes. "Lawyers are handling it." "Which lawyers?" "The estate lawyers." I almost laughed. "The estate lawyers isn't a name." His jaw flexed. "You don't trust me, do you?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. The brother who taught me how to drive. The brother who once spent 3 hours helping me build a science fair project. The brother who stood beside me at Dad's retirement party. The brother I'd trusted my entire life. And for the first time, I didn't recognize him. "No," I said quietly. "I don't." The room went still. Mom entered from the hallway a few seconds later. She looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Like grief had physically reduced her. "Please stop fighting," she said. Neither of us answered. Because we both knew this wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about something else. Something neither of us wanted to say out loud. That afternoon, I drove into Helena and met with an attorney. Her name was Evelyn Parker. Mid-50s. Sharp eyes. No nonsense. The kind of person who looked like she could spot a lie before the speaker finished telling it. Her office overlooked Last Chance Gulch. The walls were lined with legal books and framed photographs. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. Dad's death. The missing records. The locked office. The email. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Do you believe your brother forged documents?" The directness caught me off guard. I stared out the window. "I don't know." "That's not what I asked." I sighed. "No," she waited. Then I corrected myself. "I think something happened." "Good." I frowned. "Good?" People who start investigations convinced they already know the answer usually make mistakes. She folded her hands. "Facts first, conclusions later." Dad would have liked her. That thought hit harder than I expected. Evelyn requested copies of every document I could access. The problem was there weren't many. Almost everything seemed to be under Derek's control. Still, she started pulling public records. Property filings, business registrations, tax information, banking disclosures, the boring stuff. The stuff most people ignore. The stuff that often matters most. 3 days later, she called me. "Come by my office." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. When I arrived, several files were spread across her conference table. She pointed to one. "Do you recognize this company?" The name meant nothing to me. Foster Agricultural Holdings, LLC. I shook my head. "No, it was formed 8 months ago." I looked closer. Then I froze. Derek's name appeared on the paperwork, along with another detail. The ranch property. Part of it had been transferred. Not all of it. Just enough. Enough to matter. My heartbeat accelerated. When did this happen? 4 months ago. Dad had still been alive. Very much alive. What was his condition then? I swallowed. He was already in treatment. Evelyn nodded. Interesting. The word landed heavily. Interesting. Not illegal. Not impossible. But definitely interesting. The next few weeks became a blur of records, paperwork, and uncomfortable discoveries. Every answer seemed to generate 3 new questions. A signature appeared on one filing that looked slightly different from Dad's normal signature. Not dramatically. Just enough to bother me. A property transfer appeared during a period when Dad had spent nearly 3 weeks in the hospital. A financial authorization surfaced that nobody in the family had ever discussed. Individually, none of it proved anything. Together, they formed a pattern. A pattern I couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Derek grew increasingly hostile. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. One evening, he cornered me in the driveway. "You hired a lawyer?" It wasn't a question. I didn't bother pretending. Yes. His face darkened. "You really want to do this? Do what? Tear the family apart?" I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. "You're blaming me. You think Dad would have wanted this?" That one hurt. Because I wasn't sure anymore what Dad would have wanted. The only thing I knew was that he had hidden that email. For me, not for Derek. For me. And people don't hide warnings unless they're worried. A week later, I moved into a small extended-stay hotel on the edge of town. The ranch no longer felt like home. Every hallway felt tense. Every meal felt forced. Mom kept trying to play peacemaker. Derek kept acting like I was the enemy. So I left. The hotel wasn't much. Brown carpet. Weak coffee. A parking lot view. But at least I could think. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello," a man's voice answered. "Major Foster." "Yes." "My name is Thomas Granger." I didn't recognize it. "I'm calling from First Western Bank." Immediately, my attention sharpened. "What about?" There was a pause. Long enough to matter. Then he lowered his voice. "I worked with your father for almost 20 years. My pulse quickened. "Okay. I probably shouldn't be making this call." That sentence changed everything. I sat upright. Outside rain tapped against the hotel window. "I think there's something you need to see." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "What kind of something?" Another pause. Then, "The kind that explains where some of the money went." For several seconds I couldn't speak, because suddenly the missing documents, the property transfers, the strange signatures, the hidden email, they no longer looked like isolated pieces. They looked like parts of the same story. And for the first time I began to suspect that whatever Derek was hiding, it was bigger than land, bigger than paperwork, bigger than family arguments, much bigger. The meeting at First Western Bank lasted less than 40 minutes. It changed everything. Thomas Granger wasn't some low-level teller looking for attention. He was a senior account manager who had known my father for nearly 2 decades. Dad trusted him. I could see that from the way he spoke about him. Respectfully. Carefully. Like he was talking about a friend. We met in a small office overlooking the parking lot. Nothing fancy. Beige walls, cheap blinds, a coffee machine humming somewhere down the hall. Thomas closed the door before sitting down. "I need to be careful here." I nodded. "I understand." "No, Major Foster, I don't think you do." His expression was serious. "The reason I'm speaking to you is because your father personally instructed me to contact you if certain transactions ever became an issue." Every nerve in my body seemed to tighten. "What transactions?" He opened a folder. The paper sliding across the desk sounded louder than it should have. "These." I stared at the account statements. At first they looked ordinary. Numbers, transfers, withdrawals. Then I saw the dates. My stomach dropped. One transaction alone was nearly $200,000. Another exceeded $80,000. Several more followed. The timing was what made my blood run cold. Most of them happened during the months Dad had been receiving treatment. Some occurred during periods when he was hospitalized. One happened while he was in intensive care after a severe infection. I looked up. "Who authorized these?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid another document across the desk. A power of attorney. Signed. Notarized. Official. At least it appeared official. My father's signature sat at the bottom. But something felt wrong. The shape of the letters. The spacing. The pressure. I couldn't explain it. It simply didn't look like him. Thomas folded his hands. When this document was presented, some of us had concerns. My heart hammered. What kind of concerns? The kind you can't prove. That answer somehow scared me more. Because it sounded honest. Why wasn't anything done? His face tightened. Because concerns aren't evidence. I sat there staring at the paperwork. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small, too quiet. When I finally left the bank, I remained in my rental car for nearly 20 minutes. I couldn't start the engine. Couldn't think straight. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above me. The same sky I'd grown up under. The same sky Dad loved. And for the first time, I genuinely wondered if my brother had stolen from our father before he was even buried. That thought made me physically sick. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. Filing a lawsuit against your own brother isn't satisfying. It's like amputating a limb to stop an infection. Necessary, but painful. The paperwork alleged financial misconduct, improper transfers of estate assets, and requested a full accounting of the estate. When Derek received notice, the war officially began. Before then, everything had happened behind closed doors. Afterward, it became public. And ugly. The first attack came through family. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly called. "Natalie, honey, why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Going after your brother." The phrase irritated me immediately, as if I were the aggressor. As if I had started this. I spent 20 minutes listening to a version of events that sounded nothing like reality. According to Derek, I was angry because Dad trusted him more. According to Derek, I was trying to seize control of the ranch. According to Derek, military service had made me cold and detached from the family. It was impressive. Not because it was believable, because of how quickly it spread. Within weeks, cousins were avoiding me. Family friends stopped returning calls. People I'd known my entire life suddenly looked uncomfortable around me. Rumors move fast in small communities, especially when they tell people what they already want to believe. One afternoon, I stopped by a hardware store. An older rancher named Bill Jensen had known me since I was 12. He'd attended my Army commissioning ceremony, taught me how to repair fencing, once drove 3 hours through a snowstorm to help Dad pull a truck from a ditch. Bill barely looked at me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of Bill, because it meant Derek's campaign was working. The next attack came online. Social media. Facebook. The modern town square. Derek never directly mentioned me. He didn't have to. Instead, he posted long messages about family loyalty, about betrayal, about greed, about honoring a father's wishes. His friends flooded the comments. Praying hands, heart emojis, supportive messages. Nobody asked for evidence. They never do. People love certainty, especially when they aren't the ones paying the price. Fortunately, Evelyn Parker didn't care about Facebook. She cared about facts. Every time something happened, she gave me the same advice. Document it. So I did. Texts, emails, phone records, social media posts, witness statements, everything. The Army teaches discipline. That discipline became my greatest weapon. I created folders, spreadsheets, timelines. Every interaction was recorded. Every conversation documented. Every unusual event preserved. Some nights I sat in that extended stay hotel until midnight organizing records. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't afford not to. The discovery process slowly began revealing more information. Financial records arrived. Property documents arrived. Corporate filings arrived. And then one name kept appearing. Again, and again, and again. Michael Reeves. I first noticed it on a set of accounting records, then on a business filing, then on several transaction authorizations. "Who is Michael Reeves?" I asked Evelyn. She adjusted her glasses. "Accountant." For Dad, for Derek. The answer lingered. We began digging deeper. Michael had worked with Derek's business operations for nearly 10 years. By all accounts, he knew everything. Money, transfers, corporate structures, asset movements. If anyone understood what happened behind the scenes, it would be him. Naturally, we wanted to speak with him. That turned out to be impossible. No one could find him. His office was closed. His phone disconnected. Former coworkers claimed he moved. Nobody knew where, or at least nobody was willing to say. Weeks passed, then months. Every lead disappeared. It was as if Michael Reeves had simply vanished. One evening after a particularly frustrating day, I sat across from Evelyn in her office. Outside, snow drifted through downtown Helena. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I broke the silence. "How important is he?" She didn't hesitate. Very. I stared at her. That important? Potentially case-changing. The words landed heavily. Case-changing. I leaned back. Then we find him. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's the plan. As I stood to leave, she gathered several files into a stack. Then she looked up. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I saw genuine concern in her eyes. Natalie. Yeah, if Michael Reeves tells the truth. She paused. He may be the only person who can explain exactly what your brother did. I nodded slowly. Then I walked out into the falling snow. At that moment, I didn't know where Michael Reeves was. I didn't know if he'd ever be found. I didn't know if he'd help us. All I knew was that somewhere out there was a man holding answers. Answers my brother desperately didn't want anyone to hear. And deep down I had a feeling Derek was becoming afraid. Because innocent people don't worry about missing witnesses. Only guilty ones do. By the time the first major hearing arrived, winter had settled over Montana for good. The mountains were white. The roads were slick. And every morning I woke up feeling like I'd been carrying a 50-pound rucksack through my sleep. Lawsuits look exciting on television. In real life, they're mostly paperwork, waiting, and anxiety. Months of anxiety. The courthouse in Helena wasn't particularly impressive. Red brick, old stone steps, metal detectors that looked older than some of the deputies operating them. Still, my stomach tightened every time I walked through those doors, because every hearing felt like another chance to lose. That morning, Derek arrived looking completely relaxed. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, confident smile. If someone had walked into the courtroom without knowing the story, they would have assumed he was the victim. His attorney certainly acted that way. The man was smooth, dangerously smooth. He spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from years of convincing people to ignore what was right in front of them. Across the room, my mother sat behind Derek. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I blamed her, because I missed her. The woman sitting there barely resembled the mother who used to cheer at my softball games. Grief had changed her. Fear had changed her. And somewhere along the way, Derek had convinced her that I was the threat. The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. 4 long hours of financial disclosures, procedural arguments, and competing narratives. Derek's lawyer painted a simple picture. Natalie Foster. Career military. Rarely home. Detached from family affairs. Now, suddenly demanding control of assets she barely understood. It was effective. Not because it was true. Because it sounded plausible. That's the dangerous thing about lies. The best ones borrow pieces of reality. Yes, I'd spent years away from Montana. Yes, military service kept me moving. Yes, Derek had been physically present while Dad was sick. Those things were true. The problem was what he left out. The phone calls. The visits. The money I'd quietly sent when Dad's medical bills grew. The dozens of conversations Dad and I shared over the years. Love isn't measured in zip codes. But courtrooms don't always see that. Several times during the hearing, I caught the judge studying me carefully. Not suspicious. Not hostile. Just uncertain. That uncertainty terrified me. Because uncertainty is where cases are lost. When we finally stepped into the hallway afterward, I could see frustration on Evelyn's face. Not panic. Never panic. But concern. Talk to me, I said. She glanced toward the elevators. We need more. The answer wasn't surprising. Still, it landed like a punch. What we have isn't enough. It proves questions. She paused. It doesn't prove answers. I understood exactly what she meant. The financial irregularities were troubling. The property transfers were troubling. The timing was troubling. But troubling isn't the same thing as fraudulent. Judges don't rule on suspicions. They rule on evidence. And the one person who could potentially connect everything together remained missing. Michael Reeves. The ghost. The accountant who seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. Over the following weeks, Evelyn's investigators kept searching. Former employers, old addresses, professional contacts, retirement records, tax filings. Nothing. Every lead ended the same way. Dead. Meanwhile, Derek grew more confident. You could see it, feel it. His emails became bolder. His attorney more aggressive. The settlement offers disappeared completely. One afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. Only 6 words. You should have walked away. No signature. No explanation. Nothing. I showed it to Evelyn. She stared at it for several seconds, then added it to the file. By then, our file had become enormous. Binders, folders, digital backups, thousands of pages, enough paper to fill an entire shelf. Still, something crucial was missing. The person who knew what happened behind the curtain. The person who had actually seen the machinery operating. Michael Reeves? February turned into March. March turned into April. The final hearing date approached. And still nothing. One evening I sat alone in my hotel room staring out at the parking lot. The same parking lot I'd looked at for months. The same flickering streetlight. The same faded pickup trucks. The same sense of limbo. I thought about Dad. About everything he'd taught me growing up. One memory surfaced unexpectedly. I was 12 years old. We'd been repairing a section of fencing after a storm. I remember complaining about how long it was taking. Dad had laughed. Then he'd handed me a hammer. Most important things take longer than you want them to. At the time, I thought he was talking about fences. Years later, I realized he was talking about life. My phone rang at 9:42 that night. Evelyn. I answered immediately. What's wrong? Silence. Not bad silence. Different silence. The kind that makes your pulse quicken. Natalie. Her voice sounded strange. Tight. Controlled. Excited. My heart started pounding. What happened? Another pause. Then 4 words. We found Michael Reeves. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. I stood up so fast my chair tipped backward. What? We found him. I couldn't speak. Months. We'd spent months looking. Where? Idaho. The answer stunned me. Apparently, Michael had been living quietly in a small town outside Coeur d'Alene. Retired. Off the grid. Using a post office box. Avoiding nearly everyone connected to his former life. I pressed a hand against my forehead. Does he know who we are? Yes. And the pause that followed felt endless. Then Evelyn finally spoke. He's willing to talk. Every muscle in my body tightened. What did he say? I heard papers rustling on her end. Then her voice dropped lower. Almost a whisper. Natalie, yeah, I think your brother has a very serious problem. The words sent a chill through me. Not because they sounded dramatic. Because Evelyn never exaggerated. Ever. What did Michael tell you? He wouldn't discuss details over the phone. Why not? Because he wants to testify. I walked toward the window. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness. Slow, silent, almost peaceful. The complete opposite of what I was feeling. When the final hearing, my pulse hammered in my ears. For months, we'd been chasing shadows. For months, Derek had controlled the narrative. For months, we'd been trying to prove something we couldn't fully explain. Now suddenly there was a witness. A real witness. One who had been inside the machine. One who had seen everything. Before hanging up, I asked the question that mattered most. Evelyn. Yes. What exactly does Michael have? For the first time that night, I heard genuine disbelief in her voice. The kind of disbelief an attorney rarely allows herself. The kind that only appears when something is much bigger than expected. He says he has records. What kind of records? Another pause. Then, the kind that can destroy a man. I stood there staring into the darkness long after the call ended. And for the first time since Dad died, I believed we might actually win. The morning of the final hearing arrived cold and gray. I woke before my alarm. Not because I was nervous. Because my body had forgotten how to sleep before important days. The Army does that to you. Years of deployments, inspections, evaluations, and command responsibilities train your brain to wake up before trouble arrives. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and stared out the window. The parking lot was still dark. A light snow drifted across the pavement. For a long moment I simply sat there, thinking about Dad. Thinking about the ranch. Thinking about how 6 months earlier I had flown to Montana believing I was coming home to grieve. Instead I had walked into a battlefield. At 8:45 a.m., Evelyn and I entered courtroom 4B. The room was already filling. Clerks, attorneys, a few local reporters. Several members of the Foster family. Word had spread. People knew something important was happening. Across the room, Derek sat beside his attorney. Relaxed, confident, almost cheerful. The sight of him surprised me. If Michael had already spoken to his lawyer, Derek should have been worried. Instead, he looked comfortable. Too comfortable. As I took my seat, he leaned slightly toward me. That familiar smirk appeared. The same one he'd worn since this whole nightmare began. You're finished. His voice barely carried beyond our table. I didn't answer. For the first time, I genuinely didn't need to. Because something about him felt different. Not stronger. Desperate. Like a man trying to convince himself. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. For nearly an hour, the courtroom moved through procedural issues. Asset valuations. Financial disclosures. Property assessments. The usual legal machinery. Derek's attorney argued aggressively. The ranch should remain under Derek's management. The transfers were legitimate. The transactions were authorized. Nothing improper had occurred. On the surface it sounded convincing, professional, polished, reasonable, exactly the way a lie is supposed to sound. Eventually the judge looked toward Evelyn. Anything further, counsel? My attorney stood, calm, controlled, the same way she'd stood 100 times before. Yes, Your Honor. She picked up a folder. We would like to call one final witness. The room became quiet. Not courtroom quiet. Different. The kind of silence that happens when people sense something important is about to occur. The judge nodded. Proceed. Evelyn turned toward the rear doors. Michael Reeves. The doors opened, and everything changed. The reaction happened instantly. I watched Derek's face drain of color. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes widened. The confidence disappeared completely. No, the word escaped before he could stop it. Then came the whisper. Not him. For months I'd imagined this moment. Nothing prepared me for seeing genuine fear in my brother's eyes. Michael Reeves walked slowly toward the witness stand. Mid-60s. Gray hair. Plain suit. No drama. No theatrics. Just a tired man carrying a lifetime of secrets. After being sworn in, he sat down. The courtroom remained silent. Evelyn approached. Mr. Reeves, how long did you work with Derek Foster? About 10 years. And what was your role? I handled accounting, financial reporting, business records, and asset documentation. Simple answers. Direct answers. The truth usually sounds simple. Then Evelyn asked the question. Did you become aware of misconduct involving the estate of William Foster? Michael closed his eyes briefly, like a man preparing to lift something heavy. Yes. The room froze. Even Derek's attorney stopped writing. Evelyn continued. Please explain. Michael looked toward the judge. Then toward Derek. Finally he spoke. The property transfers weren't authorized by William Foster. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge immediately called for silence. Michael continued. The signatures were altered. I heard someone inhale sharply behind me. My pulse hammered. Months of questions, months of doubt, months of wondering whether I was losing my mind. And now the truth was finally being spoken aloud. Evelyn handed him a document. Do you recognize this? Yes. What is it? A draft version of a transfer document. And who modified it? Derek Foster. The silence somehow became even heavier. Then came the next document. And the next. And the next. Emails. Accounting records. Transfer requests. Internal notes. A trail. A complete trail. Michael had saved everything. Every version. Every revision. Every instruction. For years, Derek's attorney objected repeatedly. The judge overruled repeatedly. The evidence kept coming. Then Michael delivered the blow that ended the case. Did Derek Foster ever discuss why he believed he could get away with these actions? Michael nodded. Yes. The courtroom felt completely still. What did he say? Michael opened a small folder, removed a printed transcript, then read directly from the page. Natalie's always away with the army. She'll never know what happened here. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. The words simply hung there. Permanent. Irreversible. My brother lowered his head, because there was nothing left to deny, nothing left to explain, nothing left to hide. The rest happened quickly, much faster than the previous 6 months. The judge reviewed the evidence, the financial records, the emails, the testimony, the documentation Michael had preserved. Then he removed his glasses and looked directly at Derek. I find the evidence overwhelmingly credible. The sentence hit like a hammer. The judge continued. The fraudulent transfers would be voided. The estate would be restored. A formal investigation would be referred to the appropriate authorities. Additional civil penalties would be assessed. By the time he finished, Derek looked 20 years older. My mother was crying quietly. Not dramatic sobs, just tears. The kind that come when reality finally arrives. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed through the courtroom. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of manipulation. 6 months of watching my father's legacy being dismantled piece by piece. And now it was over. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted gently through the Montana air. Reporters gathered near the steps. Attorneys exchanged handshakes. People moved on to the next case. The next story. The next conflict. That's how life works. Even when your world stops, everyone else's keeps moving. A week later, I returned to the ranch. Alone. The property looked exactly as it had the day I arrived after Dad's death. The white fence. The barn. The cottonwood tree. Only now it felt different. Lighter somehow. I walked into Dad's old study. For the first time in months, the room felt peaceful. While cleaning a drawer, I found something I hadn't seen before. A sealed envelope. My name written on the front. Dad's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter. Only a few paragraphs. Near the end, one sentence stopped me cold. If you're reading this, it means you never stopped fighting for what's right. I'm proud of you for that. I sat there for a long time afterward, just holding the letter, listening to the wind outside, thinking about everything we'd lost and everything we'd saved. People sometimes ask whether I got revenge. The truth is, revenge wasn't the victory. The victory was the truth. The victory was protecting what my father built. The victory was knowing that lies eventually run out of places to hide. I didn't win because I was stronger than my brother. I won because the truth survived long enough to be heard. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, I'd like to know what you would have done. Would you have fought, or would you have walked away? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that we're not as alone as we think we are. And if this journey meant something to you, consider subscribing. We share stories every day about resilience, family loss, and the courage it takes to keep going when life gets difficult. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly deserve a place in your life.